Plain and simple. Okay. Now let's go to Acts the 7th chapter, because a lot of people go here and they try to switch up what the name should, what name should be in this part. There's two places most of these guys go to say that this name should not have been Jesus. It should have been Joshua. But we're gonna clear that up, because after we clear out these two places, and if they bring some more, we'll clear that up too. But these are the main two that they go to. Okay. Acts 7 and verse 44. Acts 7 and verse 44. Go ahead.
Our fathers had the tabernacle of witness in the wilderness, as he had appointed, speaking unto Moses.
So now, who was speaking unto Moses? The Lord was speaking unto Moses. But they had a tabernacle in the wilderness. Okay, go ahead.
That he should make it according to the fashion that he had seen. Which also our fathers that came after brought in with Jesus.
So now, he said, which our fathers had, and they brought it in with Jesus. They said that Joshua was the one that brought it in, because they was the ones who went to the land of Canaan, or they was the ones that made the temple in the wilderness, and they saying this is the one that made the tent in the wilderness, I should say, and this is the one that should have been Joshua and not Jesus. Okay, but go ahead and finish that.
Top of 45. Which also our fathers that came after brought in with Jesus into the possession of the Gentiles.
Go ahead.
Whom God drave out before the face of our fathers unto the days of David.
So now it's saying here clearly that God drave them out, and they saying it's a mistake that Jesus is here instead of Joshua, because Joshua was the one that drave them out. Okay. Now let's read this other place where they go to. Well, we're gonna go and clear this up real quick right away. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 10th chapter. 1 Corinthians 10. Before we go to the second place, we're gonna read this one. 1 Corinthians 10. And we're going to pick up at verse 1, just to see if this name should have been Joshua or if this name should have been Jesus. Okay? 1 Corinthians 10, and we're going to pick it up at verse 1. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 1. Go ahead.
Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea.
So now, when did they pass through a sea? They passed through the Red Sea back in the days when they came out of the land of Egypt. Right. Okay, go ahead.
And were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And did all eat the same spiritual meat. And did all drink the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ.
Wait a minute now. Wasn't that rock supposed to be the Father? No. That rock was Christ. That's why he said when Jesus, took care of their enemies, he was the one that was with them in the Old Testament. He was the one that brought them out of bondage, out of Egypt, and he basically was the only God man ever dealt with. Any other time, it came from the Father to the Son, and the Son to the angel, and the angel to man. So all you had was this rock in the wilderness. You ain't never spoke to the Father. And that rock was Christ. But let's go confirm that, because a lot of people don't know about this rock.
Right.
Let's go find out about this rock in the Old Testament. Okay, let's go to Deuteronomy 32nd chapter. Deuteronomy 32. Because we're going to find out that because Israel was so hard-headed and stiff-necked not to listen to the words that God gave them in their own language, that's the reason why we're sitting over here in America right now today. Because we would not follow his ways and not do what he said, and that's why he said, I'm going to bring destruction upon you. I'm going to bring the curses on you. Deuteronomy 28th chapter will let you know that the curses that he brought upon the children of Israel because they have transgressed will let you know that applies to one nationality of people and one only. Plain and simple. Okay? Now, Deuteronomy 32, and we're going to pick it up at verse 15. Deuteronomy 32 and 15. Because we got a new name now. We got Rock. I'm going to run out of space up here, but I know we got another name. We got Rock. Okay? Deuteronomy 32 and verse 15. Go ahead.
But Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked. Thou art waxen fat. Thou art grown thick. Thou art covered with fatness.
So now, what do you mean Jeshurun kicked? He would not follow the instructions of the Lord. The Lord was blessing them and brought them into the land, and he made sure that they was in the land of milk and honey. Their enemies wasn't going to mess with them, and then they got fat and kicked, and they said, look, I got all this prosperity on my own. Same thing happening today. You got a lot of people saying, I got all this prosperity on my own, and they forget God, and then God will bring them down. Because they get too puffed up, Lord will let you, he will remind you that you Israel. Spiritual and physical. Okay, go ahead.
Then he forsook God which made him, and lightly esteemed the rock of his salvation.
Wait a minute now. He esteemed who? The rock of his salvation. Because we're going to look at this salvation, but we know, bottom line is, he called him the rock. Same one we read in 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, is the same one you dealing with here. And guess what? The curses in Deuteronomy 28, right?
That's right.
Not too far from here, so you know Christ was around.
That's right.
Plain and simple. Plain and simple. You have never dealt with the Father. Okay? Now, let's go to Hebrews, the 4th chapter. We're going to go to the second place where they say it was a mistake in the name. Okay? Hebrews 4. And we're going to pick it up at verse 7. So we didn't prove that that was Jesus that was in the wilderness with the children of Israel. And we proved that he was the rock, and he was the rock of their salvation. Because that's what Jesus means, Savior.
Right.
And we're going to clear this up today, so there will be no mistake about who he is and what his name is. Okay? Now, Hebrews 4, and we're going to pick it up at verse 7. Hebrews 4 and verse 7. Go ahead.
Again, he limiteth a certain day, saying in David, Today, after so long a time, as it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. So
now, over and over, the Lord is talking about hear his voice.
Yep.
Listen to him, because we read earlier in Isaiah 28, with stammering lips and a stretched out tongue, he's going to speak to you. He's going to speak to you, and you cannot run from it, but he keep telling you, hear what he's saying. But Israel ain't listening. Okay, go ahead.
Verse 8. For if Jesus had given them rest.
So now they saying here, this was Joshua giving them rest, because after they did all they warned and they went into the land, that, because they had the war when they got into the land. And because they fought so much, if Joshua should have been the one that had given them rest. But they saying this should not be Jesus, this should be Joshua here. But I tell you the secret. Go back and read the Old Testament. You will find out that they was warned continually against other nations. And believe me, because if they backed up with the fear that the Lord wasn't with them, the Lord let them get beat up. But if they went with pride, knowing that the Lord was with them, the Lord wiped them out. But they went to war. So Joshua never gave no rest, and we're going to prove that. Okay, but go ahead and finish that.
Then would he not afterward have spoken of another day?
So now, he's talking about another day, right? Speaking of another day. But we're going to read, I was going to come back to it, but we're going to read it on through. Then we're going to go back and show you what day he was talking about. Okay? Now, go ahead, continue on.
Verse 9. There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God.
So now, we know that we got a rest coming to us. And that rest is when we won't have no more wars. Then we have to worry about no more killing, no more dying, no more nothing. That's the rest that he's talking about here. Okay, go ahead.
For he that is entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own works, as God did from his.
Go ahead.
Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief.
So now, he said, let's labor to enter into that rest, lest we fall under the same example of unbelief. What unbelief? That if you don't believe in the Lord, you waxing fat, and you don't trust in him and do what he say, that's unbelief.